Hey, what's going on, everybody? Brent Hyden here, coming at you on this Monday morning, talking 9 games around the NBA. Quick reminder before we hop into the games, please make sure you're hitting that like and subscribe button down below. Goes a long way to helping me produce more content. Also, while you're at it, if you're not already following me on Twitter, make sure you head over to the Twitter machine. You can follow me at Brent Hyden1. Also, you can head over to patreon.com, sign up for my monthly packages if you're not already signed up for my daily content and projections, or you can send me a direct message over on the Twitter machine. Find out how you can get access for 50% off the season long price. But let's go ahead and hop into the games. As I said, we have 9 games on the slate tonight. Going to do Charlotte at Indiana first. Indiana 5-point favorites in this game, a 217.5 over under. Tony Parker is doubtful. Wesley Matthews probable to suit up for the Indiana Pacers. Doug McDermott and Miles Turner both questionable in this game. Kemba Walker, fourth consecutive 30-plus point outing after scoring over 30 against the Atlanta Hawks. He's 22 from 47 from beyond the arc in his last 4 games. Darren Collison has been outstanding recently as well. Averaging 15.8 points on 57% shooting and 6.2 assists over the last 5 games. And Miles Turner averaging 3.6 blocks during the Pacers' current winning streak. It's not really a great spot for anyone on the Charlotte side of this game. Kemba Walker, as I mentioned, has been outstanding of late. He comes in at 9,200 on DraftKings, 10K over on FanDuel, with at least 50 fantasy points in 4 straight games. As I said, has a pretty lengthy streak, 4 straight games with at least 30 real points. Indiana does rank first in defensive efficiency, 2 point guards. Still a pretty strong tournament option in this spot. Jeremy Lamb, who beasted against the Hawks last game, coming in at 5,300 on DraftKings, 5,700 on FanDuel. Price tag just continues to never really go up too terribly much. Obviously, again, not a very good matchup here, but his ability to kind of fill it up across the board makes him a pretty strong option in pretty much all formats. I have a lot of interest in him as just a really safe cash option given his role and what he's able to do for this team. Outside of Jeremy Lamb, you can look at Marvin Williams. Indiana has struggled against opposing power forwards. For the most part, they are allowing 39.5% on corner threes this season. That is a spot where Marvin Williams takes 21% of his shots, but he's still just a tournament option. There's going to be some really good games that we're going to get to here shortly. I just don't have a lot of interest in the Charlotte side of things. You can still look at Cody Zeller as a cash option, but I'm going to be looking elsewhere at his current price tag, 4,500 on DraftKings, 5,400 over on FanDuel. On the Pacers side of things, it does get significantly better. With Turner questionable, it's something that we definitely need to keep an eye on. He does make a really strong option if he's able to suit up. With Oladipo out and Tyreke Evans in the starting lineup, Miles Turner averages 1.27 fantasy points per minute, gets a really good matchup here. Hornets rank 7th in fantasy points per game allowed to opposing big men. They're also giving up 45.6 rebounds on the season and 2.7 blocks per game to the position. As I mentioned, averaging 3.6 blocks during the team's current winning streak. He is a really strong option, assuming he's able to suit up. He is just 6,600 on DraftKings, 8K over on FanDuel. Price tag on FanDuel, a lot less appealing, but everybody's overpriced on FanDuel because their pricing algorithm is bunk, and, well, you just kind of have to throw prices out the window sometimes. I have a lot of interest in, was on his way to a really good game against Cleveland. Only played 22 minutes, a little bit of a blowout, also dealing with that injury, but has had some monster upside games. Really strong option in all formats. My dude Bojan Bogdanovic continues to be a monster, coming in at 5,800 over on DraftKings, 5,800 over on FanDuel. Always a guy that I love in cash games because of the consistency that he brings to the small forward position, which is weak on most nights, but leads the team in usage without Oladipo and Tyreke Evans in the starting lineup. 26.3% usage rate, 1.02 fantasy points per minute. The usage production really tough to overlook, averaging a team high 24.2 points with 3.4 rebounds, 2.6 assists per game over the last 5 games. I also really like Thaddeus Young, fantastic cash and tournament option here. He comes in at 6,200 on DraftKings, 7,200 on FanDuel. Charlotte, 23rd in defensive efficiency to opposing power forwards, allowing them to shoot 46% from the floor. He's another guy, just brings a lot of consistency to the position. Did have a little bit of a down game against the Cavaliers, shooting 3 of 10 from the floor, but most nights, because of where he takes his shots, that's not going to happen, and he's going to get you mid 20s, usually in the low 30 fantasy points most nights. More of a cash option, but still has some upside. Darren Collison, again, as I mentioned, the assist upside is there for him. This is a pretty strong spot for him. He comes in at 6K over on DraftKings, 6,700 on FanDuel. And I do have some interest, especially in tournaments, in Wesley Matthews. Obviously, there's going to be a question of whether or not he is able to suit up here, but if he does, and well, if you play on FanDuel, I think FanDuel actually has him in the player pool, DraftKings does not, you can definitely roll him out. Charlotte is really, really bad against opposing shooting guards. They rank 28th in defensive efficiency to the position. You can even look at Tyreek Evans here, who comes in at just 4,300 over on DraftKings. He is 4,600 on FanDuel. Really, really inconsistent, but again, matchup pretty solid here for him. He has not been terrible against Charlotte this season. You're looking at Domantas Sabonis if we get news that Miles Turner is out. I don't really want to chase the Corey Joseph game. But he has been over 30 fantasy points in back-to-back games. Coming off the bench once again, he does have some appeal here as well as a value option. Let's move on to the next game of the night. New York Knicks at Cleveland Cavaliers. Cleveland, 1-point favorites in this game. Yeah, Cleveland's an actual favorite. That's kind of crazy. 209.5 over under. Chetty Osman is out. Kevin Love, we do expect to suit up and play like 10 minutes, 12 minutes. Who knows? Frank Ntilikina out. Tristan Thompson out. Emmanuel Mudiay is questionable for this game. Actually, did he get ruled out? Let's take a look. Emmanuel Mudiay. No, he's not officially ruled out, but I don't expect him to suit up. I don't currently have him projected, so yeah. Mitchell Robinson has been really good for the Knicks lately, averaging 13 points on 76.2% shooting to go along with 7.7 rebounds in just 20.3 minutes over his last 3 games. Larry Nance has recorded a career best 5 straight double-doubles. Also, someone that has been really good for the Knicks, Dennis Smith, fantastic option here as well. Coming in has been just outstanding. Over 30% usage rate since joining the Knicks. This Memphis game was his first game with the team. Did struggle a little bit, but over 30 fantasy points in 3 straight games since that. Going to get all the minutes he can handle in this spot. I love Dennis Smith Jr. 6,400 on DraftKings, 6,900 over on FanDuel. We know Cleveland really, really bad against opposing point guards. They surrendered almost 25 points, 6.6 rebounds, 9.4 assists, 48% shooting, and 37.8% shooting from 3. They also really, really struggle to defend the rim. He takes 42% of his shots at the rim. The Knicks have allowed opponents to shoot 67.6% at the rim this season. And before you get mad at me and say DeAndre Jordan's there, that should be better. Well, Dallas was also really, really bad defending the rim whenever DeAndre Jordan was there, because they allowed opponents to shoot over 68% at the rim. So DeAndre Jordan being there, not going to make things that much better. DeAndre Jordan is definitely interesting here. 5,800 over on DraftKings, 6,600 over on FanDuel. Not a guy that you expect to play more than 30 minutes most nights. Currently have him projected right at 26. That's kind of where they're keeping him, in that range. But at that price tag, 5,800, really, really tough to overlook him. Put up 38.5 against Toronto with 18 rebounds. The Cavaliers, a really bad rebounding team. Really bad protecting the rim. I really, really like DeAndre Jordan here tonight as well. Interesting tournament option. Mitchell Robinson, also very, very interesting tournament option here. Again, 4,100 over on DraftKings, 4,800 over on FanDuel. Averaging almost 29 fantasy points per game over his last 3. He's just cheap for the production he's been putting up recently. Again, tournament option only. There's going to be nights where the minutes and the production aren't there for him, but at that price tag, it is really, really tough to overlook him, especially on DraftKings and GPPs. Kevin Knox continues to be one of my favorite cash options just because of the minutes floor. Averaging over 35 minutes per game over his last 6. Draws a fantastic matchup here. The Cavaliers 24th in defensive efficiency to opposing small forwards. His shot profile as well, where he takes a lot of his shots, bodes pretty well for him. Cleveland really bad defending the rim, really bad defending in the mid-range, really bad defending above the break threes. And if you look at his shot profile, 27% of his shots come at the rim, 14% of his shots in the mid-range, 28% of his shots as above the break threes. Kevin Knox, a really strong cash option at just 5K over on DraftKings, 4,600 over on FanDuel. Just a really, really good cash option. Again, has the potential to be an upside play here as well. You can look at Mario Hezonja, who got the start last game. Even though he started, still didn't get a bunch of minutes, only 25. Probably not going to get you over 30 most nights, but he does have upside, has been over 20 fantasy points in 3 straight. I just can't ever get behind chalk Mario Hezonja, so if he's going to be popular, it's going to be a hard pass for me. With Cedi Osman out, and we know Kevin Love is going to be limited, Larry Nance, one of the top options here tonight, has continued to be a monster since actually getting the run. We know he's always good whenever he gets run. This is a fantastic matchup here for Larry Nance, who comes in at 5,900 on DraftKings, 7,100 over on FanDuel. A little less appealing over on FanDuel, but again, as I mentioned already, FanDuel pricing is just absolute garbage. Everybody is overpriced. You just have to swallow that pill. But Larry Nance, over 40 fantasy points in the last 2 games, double-doubles in 5 straight games. We know the Knicks really bad against centers, really bad against opposing power forwards. This is a really, really good spot here for Larry Nance, who just continues to be a monster on the board. So I really like Larry Nance here. Colin Sexton, Jordan Clarkson, excellent mid-range options here. Knicks 23rd in defensive efficiency to opposing point guards. We've seen Sexton play really well recently. He comes in at 4,900 on DraftKings, 5,400 over on FanDuel. We know the minutes are going to be fairly secure for him. He's going to get you about 30 every night with the potential for more. Again, it's just a really good matchup. He's still really cheap. I have interest in him as well. 1 game against the Knicks this season, 23.8 fantasy points. That's not terrible, I guess, in cash games. You're looking for a little bit more in tournaments. Clarkson has also been outstanding recently, 30 fantasy points in back-to-back games. His usage without Osman and his production without Cedi Osman, really, really appealing here. 5,200 over on DraftKings, 5,800 over on FanDuel. I prefer Clarkson over Colin Sexton for just a few $100s. He has more upside than Colin Sexton does. He just does more whenever he's on the floor. I know Sexton has had some big games recently, but again, Jordan Clarkson, generally speaking, going to be the higher upside play. You can use David Nwaba, Marquise Chris as guys like on FanDuel where you're looking to drop their scores. Marquise Chris, he sucks at basketball. He's not good. Like, he couldn't get minutes when the Houston Rockets were putting like 6 guys in uniform. But he's going to get 23, 25 minutes tonight in a very positive matchup at 3K. It may not be the worst play in the world. It's just Marquise Chris is so bad. He's just so bad. Probably better over on FanDuel where he's 3,600 and you can drop his score. Yeah, let's move on before I recommend like Dang Adele or some BS. Washington at Detroit. Detroit 3.5 favorites in this one. 220 over under. Jeff Green is questionable and newly signed Wayne Ellington questionable for this game. Reggie Jackson averaging 20.5 points and shooting 50% from 3 over his last 4 games. I will get to him here in just a moment, but looking at the Washington side of things, Bradley Beal, Tomas Satoransky, 2 really, really good options here. Detroit 21st in defensive efficiency to point guards, 23rd in defensive efficiency to shooting guards. Bradley Beal, 30% usage rate over the last 2 games with Bobby Portis and Jabari Parker on the team. He has averaged 46.3 fantasy points per game over his last 6. Continues to be a guy where you feel pretty confident going to get you 40 plus fantasy points most nights. Really, really strong spot for him. He's still going to take a ton of shots. He's still going to be the guy that's going to do a lot of scoring, can still get you some steals, get you a lot of assists. I really, really like Bradley Beal. 8,800 on DraftKings, 9,600 over on FanDuel. Tomas Satoransky, gonna be really, really inconsistent most nights. He has been over 30 fantasy points in 3 of the last 4. We have seen a lot of upside out of him in some of these games recently. More of a tournament option here, but with Detroit really, really struggling to defend the rim, he could be a pretty good scoring option here. Takes 40% of his shots coming at the rim. Detroit allowing opponents to shoot 67.6% at the rim. In his first 2 games with the Wizards, Bobby Portis, second on the team in usage, has hoisted 29 shots in his first 2 games. Continues to be a really, really high upside option. And again, with Detroit struggling to defend the rim, Bobby Portis could have a big game here. 6,300 over on DraftKings. 6,400 over on FanDuel. I like him in cash. I like him in tournaments. We know he's going to get upper 20s in minutes most nights, so it is a pretty good spot here for him. Detroit also allowing 51 points in the paint per game, so there's a lot of potential here for Bobby Portis. I still really like Jabari Parker in GPPs. Detroit has been really good against opposing power forwards, though, so that is a little bit concerning. Bobby Portis spending a lot of his time at center, not at power forward. Trevor Ariza continues to be a really strong cash option on a nightly basis. Detroit allowing opponents to shoot 41.1% on corner threes. Ariza, 18% of his shots come as corner threes. He is 5,600 on DraftKings, 6K over on FanDuel. Again, more of a cash option because of the minutes he's going to play, because he doesn't generally have a ton of upside, but it is a pretty strong spot for him. If we see Jeff Green miss this game, that's going to be a boost for Jabari Parker. Jabari Parker on FanDuel at 3,900 is just a guy you just hit the lock button on and move on. He fits the criteria of one of your punt options, going to play a decent amount of minutes, going to put up decent numbers most nights. Again, matchup not the greatest, but against Detroit, he hasn't been terrible. And at 3,900, if he gets you 22 fantasy points, you'll take that all day long. And again, if Jeff Green misses this game, Jabari Parker going to play a boatload of minutes. So something to definitely keep an eye on here. On the Detroit side of things, I have interest in mostly 3 guys. Andre Drummond, Blake Griffin, Reggie Jackson. It's probably Drummond, Jackson, Griffin in that specific order, but each guy has their strengths here. Washington giving up 50.6 points in the paint, 14.3 second chance points, 47.6 rebounds per game, and they've allowed opponents to shoot 66% at the rim. Without Reggie Bullock and Stanley Johnson on the floor this season, Andre Drummond, 1.56 fantasy points per minute, 27% usage rate. That's really, really solid. We've seen Drummond play really well recently. We saw him against the Knicks put up over 60 fantasy points. He's over 50 fantasy points in 3 straight. His price tag just has not come up. He's averaging, in his first game against Washington this season, 45 fantasy points. I'll take that all day long at his $8,900 price tag. 10-6 over on FanDuel. I'll take that there too. So I really like Andre Drummond here. Blake Griffin already led the team in a usage at like 29 or a little over 29%, but without Bullock and Johnson on the floor, 33.2% usage rate, 1.31 fantasy points per minute. Wizards 27th in defensive efficiency to opposing centers, 30th in defensive efficiency to opposing power forwards. You can use Griffin, Drummond, and Jackson together in a lineup and bring it back with Bobby Portis, Jabari Parker, or Bradley Beal if you want. You can use Drummond and Griffin in the same lineup. I don't believe in negative correlation in a lot of scenarios outside of like direct backups and a few other situations, but both those guys, we know all the usage and all the shots and a lot of the offense are going to come from those 3 guys. So Reggie Jackson, as I mentioned, has been just lights out from 3, shooting 50% from beyond the arc over his last 4 games. Wizards 26th in defensive efficiency, 2-point guards. They've allowed almost 37% three-point shooting. He's topped 30 fantasy points in 6 of his last 10 games. The minutes have been solid for him. Production's been there for him, and he's still way too cheap. 5,600 on DraftKings, 6,800 on FanDuel, a little less appealing. But again, their pricing is absolute garbage today. Luke Kennard, you can use him in cash games, but they're not dedicated to giving him a bunch of minutes. And you can look at Langston Galloway as a FanDuel drop candidate. Moving on to Brooklyn at Toronto, a 226.5 over under. Toronto 10.5 point favorites. Even with that high total, I don't really have a whole lot of interest in this game. Looking at injuries, DeMar Carroll is questionable. Jared Dudley remains out, and pretty much everyone else is healthy for Brooklyn. D'Angelo Russell has reached 20 points in 16 of his last 20 games. He's averaged 26.5 points on 56.1% shooting and 7 assists through the first 2 matchups with the Toronto Raptors this season. I don't know what it is about Toronto. He loves playing Toronto. He loves feasting against Toronto. He has topped 40 fantasy points in 5 straight games against Toronto. That's a pretty good streak. He takes 25% of his shots in the paint. The Raptors have allowed opponents to shoot over 42% in the paint over the last 10 games. I like him in tournaments. He is 7,800 on DraftKings, 8,600 on FanDuel. Again, more of a tournament option here. Joe Harris, relatively safe for cash games. His minutes have been pretty solid, even with the return of Alan Crabb to the lineup, even with the return of Karis LeVert. We know the minutes are going to be right around that 30-minute mark. That makes him appealing for cash. Outside of that, though, like, you can look at Jared Allen. Ed Davis here. Allen continues to be a really high upside play in the right matchup. He's averaging 30 fantasy points a game against Toronto. He's 5,100 on DraftKings, 6,100 over on FanDuel. With Marc Gasol being there, we could see him get a few extra minutes here. But outside of that, like, I can't use Rondae Hollis-Jefferson, DeMar Carroll. I can't use any of these guys because they're not playing enough. They're not going to play enough minutes. Like, RHJ going to get like 20 minutes. DeMar Carroll maybe 24. Karis LeVert going to get like 15. Alan Crabb going to get like 15. Like, you can't use any of these guys. Not at their, no, you can't. There's not enough minutes to go around with all these bodies. So unless more people are out, it's just not an appealing spot here. On the Toronto side of things, Brooklyn, decent on defense. They're giving up 112 points per game. They are getting destroyed by big men. They're giving up 14.1 second chance points and a really high field goal percentage in the paint and mid-range. That makes Serge Ibaka at least interesting at 6,100 over on DraftKings. But again, with Marc Gasol there, like, that's going to eat into Serge's minutes at some point. He's 6,600 on FanDuel. You can use him in cash. Probably not a very good tournament option, just because there's not going to be enough minutes for him to really hit his upside. Pascal Siakam, outside of the Atlanta game, just has not really had it recently, even in good matchups. Again, you can use him in cash. You can use him in tournaments with him taking a lot of his shots. Because of where he takes a lot of his shots, he could have some success. Leads the team with 9.8 points in the paint. Brooklyn struggling against opposing power forwards over the last 10 games. But again, there's not a whole lot of appeal even in a game with the 226 total in these guys at their current price tags. Kawhi Leonard, usage monster right around 30%, 9,100 on DraftKings, 9,900 on FanDuel. Can fill up the stat sheet. He'd be the guy that I would have the most interest in. Most nights going to get you in the mid 40s in fantasy points. But again, at these price tags, there's just better places to go. So in tournaments, yeah, use Kawhi Leonard. I guess in cash, use Kawhi Leonard. But I'm just not. It's not a game I feel like forcing exposure to. Kyle Lowry, Dana Green, tournaments, sure, go for it. But yeah, we're gonna look elsewhere. One of those spots, the Clippers at Minnesota. I don't have the total in my notes. Let me pull that up real quick. It is Minnesota 4.5 point favorites in this one, a 222.5 over under. A lot to like about this game, at least on one side. Wilson Chandler remains out. Luke Richard and Mute remains out. Tyus Jones is doubtful without a timetable to return. Covington is out. Jeff Teague is probable. Jared Terrell is questionable. Derrick Rose is questionable. Jared Bayless is questionable. Whew. It's a lot of injuries. Danilo Gallinari averaging 15.5 points and 7.5 rebounds in 2 games since returning from a back injury. Had a really good game last time out. I will get to him in just a moment. Andrew Wiggins recorded 23 points and 10 rebounds on Friday for his 3rd double-double of the season. Looking at the Clippers side of things, I mentioned Danilo Gallinari. Comes in at $6K on DraftKings, $7K over on FanDuel. He's the guy that I have the most interest in here tonight. We saw the double-double against Boston. I expect him to get over 30 minutes. They've been easing him back just a little bit. Really, really good matchup here. Wolves, 8th most fantasy points per game, 2 power forwards, and they've allowed them to connect on 40% from three-point range. Gallinari, one of the top three-point shooters in the league, 39% of his shots come from 3. He's connecting on almost 45% of those shots. I love me some Danilo Gallinari in the spot. Ivica Zubac. We saw him play really well against Boston. 4K over on DraftKings, 3,900 on FanDuel. Could be one of the better value plays on the slate. Played about 23 minutes against Boston. Could maybe approach 24, 25, maybe a few more. 5 of 10 from the floor, 9 rebounds, 12 points against a Minnesota team that is giving up about 45 rebounds per game, 14.3 second chance points. I really, really like Ivica Zubac as a value option in this spot. Landry Shamet, Garrett Temple, going to split the minutes for the most part at the small forward position. Both of those guys basically played all 48 minutes at small forward last game against Boston. Landry Shamet at 3,900 is actually my favorite option here tonight as a value. Wolves have been abysmal against small forwards, 30th in defensive efficiency against the position. They're allowing 45% from the floor, 38.7% from 3. I would lean towards Shamet being the better option here just because he is a better shooter. 71% of his shots come from 3 this season. And, he's shooting almost 41% from 3. This is a matchup he was really, really good in limited minutes earlier in the season where he played, put up 26.8 fantasy points. Again, the numbers against Boston looked really, really good. I like Landry Shamet a significant amount. Going to be one of my top values here. You can look at Lou Williams. He can still be used in GPP, 6,800 on DraftKings, 7,900 on FanDuel. Patrick Beverley looked really good against Boston. I really, really like him as a cash option. He's just 5,100 across the industry. Going to play over 30 minutes most nights. We've seen the rebounding potential. We've seen just a lot of upside out of him recently. A lot of consistency too. He has had a couple of down games like Toronto. Detroit was not great, where he only took like 1 shot, but still just getting you the assists, getting you the rebounds. I really like Patrick Beverley as well. You can look at Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Montrezl Harrell. I'm not gonna be a Montrez guy. I know he's been over 30 fantasy points in 3 straight, but the consistency and the upside just has not really been there for him most nights. At 6,700, I'm still looking for 40 plus fantasy points, and he just isn't getting you that. So you can use them in cash, but as far as tournaments go, I'm going to be looking elsewhere. On the Minnesota side of things, gets a little bit muddy because we don't have an update on Rose or Bayless. Jeff Teague might be coming off the bench, but this is a great spot for Karl-Anthony Towns. And while Rose and Teague and Bayless and all these guys coming back could definitely hurt him, it's worth noting that whenever you take Butler and Covington off the floor, this season, he still has a 30.2% usage rate and still averages 1.57 fantasy points per minute. He's still going to feast. Clippers 3rd in fantasy points per game allowed to opposing centers, 30th in defensive efficiency to the position. They're giving up 45.9 rebounds per game, 14.2 second chance points, and 50.6 points in the paint. At just 10K on DraftKings, 11-2 on FanDuel. I love Karl-Anthony Towns. Gonna get you at least 50 fantasy points most nights. This is just a really, really good spot. Had a fantastic game against them last time out. I like building my lineups around Towns and Drummond tonight if I can. If I can't, it's going to be like Towns and Zubac or Drummond and Zubats. You can look at Andrew Wiggins, still a pretty solid tournament option here. Averages just shy of a fantasy point per minute whenever you bring all these guys back. If Rose or Teague or Bayless were to miss this game, it would be a usage boost for him. Not the greatest of matchups, but we've seen him playing really well recently, and Hot Streak Wiggins is at least worth noting. He's 6,500 over on DraftKings. He is 6,500 over on FanDuel. Again, Clippers, one of the best defenses in the NBA against opposing shooting guards, so more of a tough matchup, more of a tournament option here. Taj Gibson, Dario Saric continue to like cannibalize each other. Dario Saric is a fine FanDuel drop score option. It's a great matchup for both of these guys, but like I said, they're basically cannibalizing each other, and it's not really appealing to target too much. With the point guards, it's a really crappy situation unless some of these guys are out. So if we get news that Bayless and Rose are out and Jeff Teague is going to continue to be limited, then Isaiah Cannon becomes a really, really strong option here. Had a pretty solid game against who did they play the other night? I had Cannon in my lineups, actually. Against New Orleans, had 26 fantasy points. So if Teague is going to come off the bench and Rose and Bayless are out, I would still definitely consider Isaiah Cannon as a pretty strong option. 3,500 on DraftKings, 3,700 on FanDuel. If Teague starts, Jeff Teague would be a really, really strong option. 5,500 on DraftKings, 5,600 over on FanDuel. Averages like 1.1 fantasy points per minute. Probably not going to play more than 24, 25 minutes. I currently have him projected for 30, but that's just more of a, I don't know if he's going to be limited at this point in the morning. But Clippers really, really bad against opposing point guards, so he would be a pretty strong option if he's going to be if he's not going to be on a minutes limit. Derrick Rose would certainly be on a minutes limit at 5,700 on DraftKings, 5,400 on FanDuel. Would not be someone that I would have a ton of interest in if we get news that he is going to be on a minutes limit, which I find it really, really hard to believe that he would not be on a minutes limit after missing so many games here recently. Moving on to Houston or Dallas at Houston, 220.5 over under. Houston 9.5 point favorites in this one. James Harden listed as questionable. He's expected to suit up in this game. JJ Barea, of course, the only person that is out for the Mavericks. Luka Doncic, one of the 6 Mavericks that scored in double figures in the 107-104 win over Houston the last time these teams met. Harden has really struggled with the assist. Only 2 over his last 2 games, while he's averaging 7.8 on the season. Dwight Powell has hit 50% of his shots or better in 9 straight games. I'll get to Dwight Powell in just a minute, but looking at the Dallas side of things, Luka Doncic, another fantastic option, or another great game yesterday against the Trailblazers. 50 fantasy points, has done that in 3 of the last 4 games. He's going to continue to dominate usage. 30% usage rate without Dennis Smith and DeAndre Jordan. Has topped, again, 50 fantasy points in 3 of the last 4. He's a fantastic option here. There's no matchup or anything data that I'm going to throw at you to justify playing him. He's just a monster. He's a beast. Continue to roll out Luka Doncic in all formats. 9,800 on DraftKings. A little bit less appealing. 8,700 over on FanDuel. Pretty darn appealing. Tim Hardaway, Dorian Finney-Smith, Maxi Kleber, and Dwight Powell, all options in specific formats here. Hardaway looked really good against Portland, went 9 of 18 from the floor for 24 points. Houston ranks 18th in defensive efficiency to opposing small forwards on the season. He makes for a pretty strong tournament option here at his price. 5K on DraftKings, 5,800 over on FanDuel. Going to get the start alongside Jalen Brunson and Luka Doncic on the wings there. Dorian Finney-Smith is never fun to roster. Does play a pile of minutes, though, and gets a good matchup here with Houston struggling to defend opposing power forwards. They rank 17th in defensive efficiency to the position. They've given up 10.3 rebounds to get to them to go along with nearly 40% shooting from beyond the arc. 45% of his shots come from three this season. He's 4,100 on DraftKings, 4,800 on FanDuel. I feel pretty good about him in cash. Not a ton of tournament upside, but he's a guy most nights going to get you 20 plus fantasy points because he's going to play a pile of minutes. So he's someone with some rebounding potential in this spot. So that's something to definitely consider. I mentioned Dwight Powell. Connecting on 50% of his shots or better in 9 straight games. Unfortunately for Powell and Kleba, both these guys going to split minutes pretty evenly. But Powell, 1.1 fantasy points per minute without DeAndre Jordan and Dennis Smith Jr. on the floor. Houston has struggled against opposing big men with Capella gone. They have a lot of opponents to pull down almost 50 rebounds per game. I like Dwight Powell, 4,800 on DraftKings, 5,800 over on FanDuel. I like him better over on DraftKings because of power forward and center eligibility. Over on FanDuel, I think I'm going to lean Maxi Kleba because of the position eligibility, but at 5,200, it's not really an attractive spot, so I'm going to be looking elsewhere. On the Houston side of things, James Harden continues to rack up 30-plus point games. He's looking to push his streak to 30 in a row. That's just freaking insane. 1.7 fantasy points per minute, 40% usage rate with Chris Paul on the floor this season. There's absolutely no reason to be afraid of him. I know the assist numbers have been down over the past couple of games. I don't expect that to continue, but I mean, just the raw scoring alone gives him a really, really, really high floor, really high ceiling in this spot tonight. Outside of James Harden, you can look at Chris Paul. Kind of underpriced, especially over on DraftKings for the upside that he's had. He's coming off a really big game against OKC. What did he have, like 49 fantasy points against the Thunder? 49.5 fantasy points against OKC, and his price dropped. He's 6,900 on DraftKings, 7,800 over on FanDuel. He's been consistent for the Rockets since returning. Over 40 fantasy points in back-to-back games. We know the matchup. The minutes are going to be there for him. It's a pretty strong matchup here for him as well. Mavericks 18th in defensive efficiency to opposing point guards. More of a tournament option, but I still really, really like that price tag. Kenneth Faried should feast on this undersized Mavericks front court. Has racked up over 30 fantasy points in all but one of his games since coming to Houston. Dallas has allowed 48.4 rebounds to go with to opponents over the last 5 games, which is basically since DeAndre Jordan has been gone. Kenneth Faried, solid floor, solid upside. Here tonight, 6,800 on DraftKings, 7,400 on FanDuel. Outside of that, you can look at Eric Gordon. His price tag is down to 4,600 on DraftKings, 4,700 on FanDuel. He's never going to be a really, really high upside spot, but he's going to chuck a lot of shots, and that's somewhat appealing in this matchup. I mean, he's 14, 14, 12, had 9 against Denver. That was a little bit down, but 14, 14, 22, 15. Some of these games without Chris Paul, but again, he's going to get you, I mean, if he's hitting his shots, 24, 25 fantasy points with a little bit of upside, I'll take that at 4,600. So that's somewhat appealing. PJ Tucker, always cash appeal, but lacks upside most nights. Let's move on to Portland at OKC. OKC 5-point favorites in this one, a 231 over under. Jeremy Grant is out. This game is pretty straightforward. Paul George averaged 36.5 points, 8 rebounds, and 3 steals in 2 wins over Portland last month. Terrence Ferguson averages 6.8 points on the season, but has at least 10 in 7 of his last 8 games. Yusuf Nurkic had 18 points on 9 of 11 shooting in Sunday's loss, but scored 22 points in both matchups with Oklahoma City last month. Looking at the Portland side of things, CJ McCollum has been shooting the ball really, really well, connecting on 55.6% of his shots, 53.1% of his three-point attempts. OKC has struggled against opposing two guards, 4th in fantasy points per game allowed to the position, 22nd or 22% of his shots come in the paint, where OKC has struggled to defend this season. They're allowing opponents to shoot 42.2% on the season. This is a spot where I have a lot of interest in CJ McCollum for tournaments. Oklahoma City over the last 10 games, 21st in defensive efficiency to shooting guards. So CJ McCollum could actually have a decent amount of success here tonight, and he's still fairly cheap, 7,100 over on DraftKings, 7,600 on FanDuel. It's not a terrible spot here for him in cash and in tournaments. Did struggle against Dallas, but I really like CJ McCollum here tonight. You can look at Damian Lillard, 8,600 on DraftKings, 10-2 on FanDuel. Not as appealing on FanDuel, but as I mentioned, well, their pricing is absolutely terrible here recently, so you kind of have to throw that out. Oklahoma City, 24th in defensive efficiency to opposing point guards over the last 10 games. They're giving up 10.2 rebounds per game, or 10.2 assists per game to the position. It is worth noting, though, allowing opposing point guards to shoot just 43.7% from the floor, 23.7% from beyond the arc, so that could definitely limit his upside. You can look at Rodney Hood coming in at 3,900 over on DraftKings, 4,100 over on FanDuel. Gonna play in the mid-20s in minutes, gonna take a lot of shots when he's out there on the floor. Oklahoma City also has struggled against small forwards on the season, despite having Paul George there. So that's something to keep an eye on. You can look at Al-Farouq Aminu as well. Did struggle against Dallas, but has been pretty solid against OKC in the two previous matchups, averaging 33.3 fantasy points per game. Most nights going to be a consistent option. Has kind of struggled a little bit recently, but Oklahoma City, 23rd in defensive efficiency to power forwards over the last 10 games. I like him as a cash option here. And then Jusuf Nurkic, who I mentioned, did kind of beat up on Oklahoma City in the previous two games, averaging 43.9 points. Against them. Oklahoma City 14th in defensive efficiency to opposing centers over the last 10 games. Their defense has not been very good recently. They're giving up 25.3 points, 12.9 rebounds, 61% shooting to centers over the last 10 games. Jusuf Nurkic, a really, really, really strong tournament option here tonight. On the Oklahoma City side of things, even with Jeremy Grant being out, I don't have a lot of interest in Patrick Patterson here tonight. He comes in at 3,300 over on DraftKings. He is, what is his price over on FanDuel? Probably 3,500. It's probably the stone minimum. Yeah, 3,500. He's not any good. He's going to play like 28 very empty minutes. I don't think he's. Let me pull up his season, his entire season, and let's see if he's actually even topped 20 fantasy points like 5 times. Patrick Patterson. I probably should have done this beforehand, but yeah. So he's averaging 9 fantasy points per game on the season, so that's awesome. Let's see, 1 20 fantasy point game. 2 20 fantasy point games. One of them came against Atlanta. One of them came against Phoenix. Another 20 fantasy point game against the Spurs. Yeah. So in 55 games this season, he has 3 games with 20 fantasy points. So if you want to lock that into your lineups, feel free. I would be looking on FanDuel at like Abdel Nader and Deontay Burton. Guys that probably going to get a decent amount of run here. Burton 3K over on DraftKings, stone minimum over on FanDuel. Abdel Nader, he might be the guy to at least look at here. Has shown upside a few times this season. Where's the game? This one. The Knicks is whenever he had a really, really strong game. I think he's probably the guy that gets a decent amount of minutes here. They're gonna roll out a lot of bodies at power forward tonight, so I don't feel a need to force anyone, especially on DraftKings, but on FanDuel where you can drop their score, feel free. But you're looking at Russell Westbrook. You're looking at Paul George. Paul George has now topped 45 fantasy points in 10 straight games, has scored at least 30 points in 8 of his last 10. Portland ranks 23rd in defensive efficiency to small forwards on the season, has allowed them to shoot 45% from the floor, 39% from 3. I love me some Paul George, especially on DraftKings at 10-3, compared to Russell Westbrook, who is 11-4. Excuse me, over on FanDuel, where it's 11-6 and 12-1, I'm probably going Russell Westbrook there. It's a little bit closer. Westbrook, 9 straight games with a triple-double. He's going for his 10th consecutive game with the triple-double. Will be the first NBA player to record 10 consecutive triple-doubles if he is able to do it. I guarantee you he is going to be going after that tonight. So there's your narrative. If you want to play Russell Westbrook, probably going to get you 60 plus fantasy points tonight. That's pretty appealing at 11.4. You can look at Steven Adams, really strong option here. 6,200 on DraftKings, 6,900 over on FanDuel. Not the greatest of matchups, but most nights going to get you a pretty good return on his salary. Outside of that, not really looking at anyone else here. Let's move on to another unappealing game here. Miami at Denver. Milwaukee at Chicago. I skipped over that one. Let's go to that one because that one is a little bit appealing here. I forgot to put all these totals in my notes. That's somewhat tilting. Milwaukee, 10-point favorites in this one. 10.5-point favorites in this one. A 227 over under. Wow, that line has changed a lot since it opened. Mirotic is out. Wendell Carter Jr. and Dante DiVincenzo out for this game. Lauri Markkanen has recorded a double-double in 6 of the last 7 games. Milwaukee, absolute smash spot here. Giannis Antetokounmpo, very good option here tonight. Going to be overlooked, I think, given Russell Westbrook, Paul George, James Harden, and all these other options. That could be a mistake. He comes in at 11.3 on DraftKings, 12K over on FanDuel. Really strong spot here for him tonight. Chicago just really bad on defense, allowing opponents to shoot 63% at the rim this season. That's a pretty big boost to Giannis. I absolutely love Malcolm Brogdon. Continues to be a fantastic cash and tournament option. FanDuel finally raising his price up to 6,400. DraftKings just 5,700 still. Absolutely love him. Going to get you upper 20s, low 30s in fantasy points most nights. Bulls 22nd defensive efficiency to opposing shooting guards. Eric Bledsoe has averaged like 1.2 fantasy points per minute since the start of 2019. Really strong option in all formats as well. Bulls 28th in defensive efficiency to opposing shooting guard or point guards, and their lack of defensive or 3-point defense is a boost to both. They're allowing opponents to shoot right around 36% from 3 on the season. I don't have a lot of interest in Chris Middleton. Does kind of struggle against Otto Porter. The Bulls have actually been really good against opposing small forwards most of the season, but you can still use them in tournaments. Brook Lopez, a guy, I know I've hit on a lot of centers already this in this pod, but has scored at least 20 fantasy points in all but one of his last 10 games, averaging 27.6 fantasy points per game over the last 6. A little bit of narrative going up against his brother, but Chicago allowing 23.3 points, 15.5 rebounds to opposing centers on the season. Pretty good matchup here for him tonight. Looking at the Chicago side of things, you can look at Zach LaVine, 30.3% use rate, 1.27 fantasy points per minute. Whenever you take Portis, Parker, and all the other guys off the floor, Lauri Markkanen, 27% usage rate, 1.25 fantasy points per minute. I think Markkanen's the guy at 7,900 that I would have a little bit more interest in than Zach LaVine, and I'll get to why in just a moment. He is 8,300 over on FanDuel. Going to get you 40-ish most nights. Did not play in the previous time these teams met up, but going to take a lot of shots, a lot of those shots coming from 3, where Milwaukee is really struggling to defend this season. The reason why I'm not as high on Zach LaVine, Milwaukee, 57% shooting allowed at the rim this season. Zach LaVine, 49% of his shots come at the rim. You're looking for guys that can hit 3-pointers, that's hit a lot of shots in the mid-range, and with him taking like half of his shots at the rim, I think this is a spot where Zach LaVine's going to could struggle. Does project pretty well, so I do think in tournaments you can roll him out. You can look at Chris Dunn as a tournament option as well. A lot of his shots coming in the paint and mid-range though, 54% of his shots, so could be a pretty good spot here for him. Otto Porter, a lot of his 13% of his shots are corner threes. Milwaukee has allowed opponents to shoot 42% on corner threes this season. I don't hate Otto Porter in tournaments in this spot tonight. Now, on to the last game of the night, Miami at Denver. Denver, 10-point favorites in this one, 212.5 over under. This game is not very appealing outside of a couple of options. Miami, this is like the 3rd game in 4 nights, and all of them have been on the road, so that's a little bit concerning here. for Miami. But you can look at Hassan Whiteside, has been really, really strong recently, playing really, really well, has drawn a lot of praise from Eric Spoelstra. He's kind of showed a little bit of trust in him. Only 22 minutes against Golden State, 36 fantasy points. It's not the greatest of matchup, but over 50 fantasy points in 2 of the last 3 games. Did struggle in this matchup last time out, but I do like him in tournaments. Josh Richardson, a guy who's been playing a little bit better recently as well, had a really, really good game against Golden State. Still going to play a lot of minutes, going to take a lot of shots, has been shooting really well recently, 55% from the floor over his last 5 games, 54% from 3. This is a spot where the minutes make him a pretty strong cash option. Dwayne Wade, very high usage guy off the bench. Most nights going to get you in the mid to upper 20s in fantasy points. I'm fine with that at his current price tag, 5,100 over on DraftKings. Let me pull up FanDuel here. What is he over on FanDuel? 5,700 over on FanDuel. Again, just a safe floor upside option. Over 30 fantasy points in 3 of the last 4. Outside of that, Justice Winslow, 10% of his shots come as corner threes. Denver's allowed opponents to shoot 45% on corner threes over the last 10 games. It's fine, I guess. Kelly Olynyk, there's just not a whole lot to really like here. Dion Waiters probably going to garner a lot of ownership tonight. 4,100 on DraftKings, 4,400 over on FanDuel. Really big game against Golden State, but like if he's not hitting his shots, he shot 46% from 3, 47% from the floor overall last game. But like he's just scoring a bunch, and if he's not hitting those shots, he's going to absolutely sink your lineup, and I just don't want to deal with that. So I'm going to fade him tonight. Looking at the Denver side of things, Nikola Jokic continues to be an absolute monster. Has top 60 fantasy points in back-to-back games. Has notched triple-doubles in 6 of his last 10. Posting a usage rate of 29.1% over that span. He's fine in cash and tournaments. Obviously, it's not the greatest of matchups, but, well, Nikola Jokic is absolutely matchup-proof. He comes in at 11-4 on DraftKings, or 11-4 on FanDuel, 10-4 on DraftKings. Really, really strong option here tonight. Heat have struggled against opposing power forwards, 7th most fantasy points per game, 24th in defensive efficiency to the position. Paul Millsap, a pretty strong option if he suits up, 4,800 on DraftKings, 5,500 on FanDuel. If he misses, Mason Plumlee, 5,800 on DraftKings, 5,900 on FanDuel, can be used. I prefer him on DraftKings where he has power forward eligibility. Trey Lyles has been really good recently as well, 4K on DraftKings, 4,700 on FanDuel. Has played at least 20 minutes and scored at least 20 fantasy points in 4 straight games. Opponents have connected on 37% of their three-point attempts against Miami over the last 10 games. That's a pretty big boost to Jamal Murray, who takes 31% of his shots from 3, and Malik Beasley, who takes 50% of his shots from 3. With Gary Harris off the floor, Murray, 27.9% usage rate, 1.03 fantasy points per minute, has been really good since returning from that ankle injury, 21 points and 8.5 assists in 2 contests since returning from his 6-game absence. Malik Beasley averaging 20.7 points over his last 6 games. Both of those guys, the names that I'm definitely keeping an eye on. Malik Beasley at 5,300 over on DraftKings, 4,600 on FanDuel. Probably my third favorite option behind Jokic and Murray in this game. But that's going to do it for tonight's 9 games. I will be back on Wednesday. We have another monster slate on Wednesday, so good luck in all your contests tonight, and I will see you then.